Now let's improve our program with conditional statements. You probably remember the problem statement. We're still comparing the cost of two cell phone plans from ATV Telecommunications. We have our Super Saver plan and our Big Talker plan, and we need to consider which plan we're going to choose. Remember, a shortcoming of our previous work was that if we only talk 300 minutes, we'd pay less than the monthly cost. Let's go to Eclipse and show that so you can see it. So here we're going to run our program again. And maybe raise it up so you can see the input coming in. So notice when we have 300 minutes, we're now only paying $29.99 a month. Oops, we better fix that problem, because that's not how cell phone plans work. So here's the key to knowing how to fix the problem. Listen to how you describe it. If you talk less than the plan minutes, there's no additional charge, and no credit either. The fact that we're using the word if in English is not accidental. That is the same if that's in Java, just with a little more technical reason. So the if shows up naturally in the discussion, and that's a hint that a conditional statement is what's needed. So, recall our previous code. We have our plan minutes, our talk minutes, our monthly cost, our additional minutes, our total cost in pennies, and we have our formula. All of those things stay the same. In fact, we can reuse all of the code we've done before. The original formula is correct only when the talk minutes is more than the plan minutes. Now, there's more than one way to fix this code, and so we want to pay attention to that. If you fixed it a different way, that could be just fine too, as long as the code works correctly. So let's go to Eclipse. The first thing we want to do is to make sure we're in the right part of the code to start with. So if we're looking at the Super Saver plan, which is what we've been working on first, then what we should probably do is to comment out the other plan. There's a neat way to do this in Java. What you do is put /* before it and */ after it. That essentially disables that section of code, so it's not going to get in our way and cause us trouble. One thing to notice when you do that is that the code turned green. That is Eclipse's way of telling you that that's a comment now. And so that helps you see that you're not actually running that code. So do pay attention to the colors that things turn out in Eclipse. Now we can get up to the right part of the code. Here's where we're looking at the total cost of the pennies. So this is the statement that we want to put the if statement around. So if our talk minutes is more than the plan minutes. Now we could leave our code like that, but it's a little bit messy. What we'd like to do is to tab over. That indentation shows that the total cost for pennies assignment statement is inside the conditional statement. The other thing that I like to do is I like to put curly braces around here. It turns out that it's really easy to make a mistake and read the indentation instead of reading the curly braces. When the indentation and the curly braces don't match, guess what? The curly braces are correct and the indentation is wrong. So it's important to have those things matching. I find that putting extra curly braces in actually saves me time programming. But you may find something different, and I don't care which way you do it. Now, you'll notice that Eclipse is unhappy with us right now. The way you can see that is there's this little red indication right over there, and it's saying the local variable total cost pennies has not been initialized. Well, you might say to yourself, but wait a minute, it was initialized right there. Well, it turns out that Eclipse is actually smart enough to know that it's possible that this condition isn't true. And when that condition isn't true, total cost in pennies really hasn't been initialized. And that's what it's trying to say to you. In other words, in this case, it actually did find a mistake. So let's fix that mistake. We'll put in an else statement. Now this time I'm going to get smart and just put in my curly braces to start with. If the talk minutes are smaller than the plan minutes, total cost in pennies should be monthly cost in pennies. And there we go. So now we're ready to run. Now we've got a couple of different cases that we have to check. First thing, let's check with 100 minutes. Now you need to think about what you think the answer is going to be before the computer tells you. Because if you don't think about that, it's too easy to accept the computer's answer as being correct, even when it isn't. So I think it should be charging us $39.99 at this point. And there it is. That's a good sign. Now let's run it again with exactly 500 minutes. Notice that's at the boundary between the two conditions. The total cost is $39.99. That looks good too. Now let's run our original example where we had 1,200 minutes. Lots and lots of those expensive extra minutes. And we see we get $74.99 back. That looks good. Now, we need to remember though that we didn't fix both parts of the code. So let's copy this part of the code and go down and fix that code that we commented out. So this is the code that we're replacing, and we're going to paste our code in there. We also need to remember to remove the comments, because otherwise we won't be able to see what we've done. So there's one of our comment markers to remove, and there's another one up at the top. Don't let the little red squiggles bother you right now, because now they're gone. One other thing I noticed while I was scrolling around is that I don't have a space after the else. Now it turns out that leaving blank lines in programs makes them a lot easier to read, and so it's sort of an important skill to develop. Different people have different standards, but I like to sort of complete one thought without extra lines and then have another thought. So here, in this part of the code, the thought is calculation. This part of the code, on the other hand, is about the output. And so it makes sense for those to be in different thoughts, and putting one blank line between them, that tells you that they're different thoughts. Oh yes, we should run our program again. Remember, never trust code that you haven't run at least once, and usually many, many more times than once. So let's think about 500 minutes. We decided that worked well in our super saver case. That would be less than the minimum minutes in our big talker case. And there we go, the big talker is $59.99. Now let's bounce up to 1,000 minutes and see what happens. So we'll run again. Okay, the super saver is no longer so cheap because we're paying for a lot of extra minutes. The big talker, on the other hand, is just on the boundary, so it's still $59.99. And now let's do 1,200 minutes, our original example. And there we go, $74.99 and $65.99. So it looks like everything's working correctly. Now, there's another shortcoming to our code. What happens if somebody says that they talk negative minutes? Now, you might say people would never make a mistake like that, but actually people make mistakes with computer programs all the time. So what would be nice to do if they said they talk negative minutes is to let them enter the data again. So let's go and put that into the code. Back to Eclipse. Now that's going to be up at the top. So we'll scroll up there. Above our two carefully crafted if statements. Right here is where we're entering the minutes to talk. So if talk minutes is less than 0, what we're going to want to do is to let people re-enter it. So usually it's a good idea to give the user some idea of what they did wrong. Negative minutes for talk does not make sense. You also want to be polite to your users. So don't say mean things to them. The next thing to do is to grab our input and paste it in there. Enter the number of minutes you talk and enter it again. Okay, so let's go and see what happens with our program now. So the first thing we want to check is that we didn't break anything that was working. Whew, that looks good. Now let's check for the case we actually implemented new. So let's say we entered negative 100 minutes. Negative minutes for talk does not make sense. Enter the number of minutes. And now we can enter our 1200 and everything's working fine. So that problem is solved. Sort of. We'll talk about the sort of in a few minutes. Well, guess what? There's another shortcoming to our code. We really haven't made the decision for the user about which plan they should choose. That's unfortunate. You know, you want to do as much work for the users as you can, and comparing numbers is one of the things computers are really good at. So let's make the comparison and let the user draw their conclusion. Back to Eclipse. Now, if you've been paying attention to what we've been doing, you're going to realize we've got a little problem here. Because when we were creating the cost, our total cost in pennies, we created it first, then we calculated it for our Super Saver plan, then we printed it out, then we reused that same cost for our Big Talker plan. That's a problem because now when we want to print out and make a comparison of those, we don't have them at the same time. There's a very important principle here that I want you to remember, and that is that a variable can only hold one thing at one time. So when you have a Super Saver plan and it gets overwritten by the Big Talker, there's no way to get the Super Saver plan total back. So what we need to do is to put two different variables in. So we're going to go up to the top and change the name of total cost in pennies to total cost in pennies Super Saver. Yes, the name is getting long. If you do this correctly, Eclipse will actually show you all of the places where you need to change it by putting these little red boxes at the side. So that's really helpful. So this is Super Saver. Whoops. Control Z. Sorry about that. Here we go. And here's the last one. Now with the Big Talker, we're going to need to have its own variable. So we're going to make an int called total cost pennies Big Talker. And we're going to go down and fix these other variable names. So there's Big Talker. Here's Big Talker. And here's Big Talker. If you've been watching, the little red boxes at the side are disappearing as I go down and work on that. And now we're ready to make our big comparison. If total cost pennies Big Talker is less than total cost pennies Super Saver, well, in that case, what do we want to do? Well, we want to print out the Big Talker plan is cheaper. Don't want to leave an extra line there, so let's clean that up. And here's an else. And in this case, we will do system out print line, the Super Saver plan is cheaper. Okay, ready to run. Whoops. Okay, I'm actually kind of glad this happened because these are the kind of things that people sometimes go and click proceed on. It's really important that you don't do that because when you do that, you're actually running an old version of your program. You're not running the version that's on the screen. This makes it absolutely impossible to debug. So whenever that happens, cancel immediately and go and fix the problem. So let's see, and it's pretty obvious what the problem is. Now, this is an interesting situation too. Eclipse is complaining about this last curly brace because that's where it's detecting the problem. But that isn't where the problem is. The problem is actually here. I got a little bit absent-minded and added in a curly brace when I didn't need one. This is why you cannot just accept Eclipse's word for what you should do and what you should fix. The one that needs to be removed is that one there. Notice that when I remove that, it fixes the complaint Eclipse had. And now we're ready to run. You may notice that this little red X is right up here still. That's because the file hasn't been saved yet. Once the file is saved, Eclipse will know that our code is all right. So here we go. Okay, so if we talk 100 minutes, we're certainly expecting our Super Saver plan to be cheaper. And that's what our program says. If we talk 500 minutes, again, the Super Saver should be cheaper. If we talk 1,000 minutes, the Big Talker is cheaper. And if we go to our 1,200 minutes, the Big Talker plan is cheaper too. It looks like we finally got our program working correctly. So, what are the remaining shortcomings of this program? Well, one thing that's wrong is that if the user makes an illegal data entry twice, we can't fix it. And in fact, we don't have the software tools to do that just yet, but we will soon. Now, we could ask them to enter the data a third time and then try to fix it, and ask them to enter it a fourth and try to fix it, and we would get many deeply nested if-elses. And eventually, what's more, we're going to have to stop. So this is really not the right way to fix that problem, although it is tempting to try. The other thing is what happens if the user enters something like a word instead of a number. You might think that users wouldn't do things like that, but it turns out they do. And unfortunately, we can't solve that problem right now. That one's going to have to wait till next semester. So you're going to have to program quite a while to know how to fix that one. Let's talk a little bit about the culture of computer science. Why are computer scientists so obsessed with every crazy little thing that could possibly go wrong in a program? Well, first off, we have a social responsibility to make software work properly. When software fails, people can get hurt, and in fact, people can get killed and have been killed by software. If you're interested in that, do a Google search on Therac 25 and you'll see what I'm talking about. So it's very important that we have a social responsibility to the people who use our software to make sure it works properly. But beyond that, we also have a professional responsibility to make sure that our software works properly. So getting things exactly perfect is part of our way of expressing who we are as professionals. What's more, if our software doesn't work correctly, employers will eventually fire us. And so that's a good motivation too. Another thing I want to talk a little bit about is respect for users. Isn't it really the user's fault if they enter the wrong thing? Yeah, maybe, if we communicated our expectations perfectly, if the user understood perfectly, and if their fingers didn't slip on the keyboard. Frustrating users is very unprofessional behavior. Users pay your salary when you're a software engineer. We love users. So make their world easier and they'll make your world easier too by giving you more money. Thank you very much.